Committee in the House, I've been working tirelessly over the past year to expose the massive fraud that Tim Walz and his administration has enabled. In 2024, $343 million left the Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport in cash. In 2025, that number had grown to $350 million.
The fact that she ghosted us, she would not even respond to multiple inquiries to a state legislature where she used to serve. I think it shows disdain for Minnesota taxpayers that she's unwilling to even answer these questions.
Kristin Robbins was one of the only lawmakers consistently sounding the alarm on fraud. While she has officially dropped out of the governor's race, Robbins said, quote, "Once Senator Klobuchar became sort of the anointed candidate to replace him, I just think the establishment kind of circled the wagons and, it became a challenging endeavor, and I'm a realist and I am a numbers person, and when I look at the math, I don't see a path for me to win," end quote. Good afternoon, beautiful people, and welcome to Nellie Miranda.
I still think people are ready for a change, but it definitely became more difficult when Senator Klobuchar became the candidate.
Running for governor is hard.
Brian McClung knows this better than most. He's a Republican strategist who worked for Governor Tim Pawlenty.
When Amy Klobuchar entered the governor's race, it fundamentally altered the outlook. That's a reality of the race. Now, that's not to say that Amy Klobuchar, can measure the drapes right now. I think Minnesota has shown that this is a competitive state.
With a dead-even tie in the Minnesota House and a tie in Congress with 4 Republicans and 4 Democrats, McClung expects a tight race for governor once a clear candidate emerges for Republicans.
Well, I think Republicans are going to focus on fraud.
As always, please make sure you like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. Okay, so Kristin Robbins originally jumped into the race because of what she described as years of fraud, out of control government spending, and a lack of accountability. She wasn't just another candidate, she was the chair of the Fraud Prevention and State Agency Oversight Committee, which means that she had a front row seat to what was really going on behind the scenes. Her voice is important because the fraud in Minnesota is astronomical. We're talking about billions of dollars in fraud in just about every social program imaginable. There have already been dozens of convictions tied to fraud schemes involving federal food programs and social services, and federal agents are still conducting raids as recent as this week across businesses and childcare centers tied to fraud investigation. There is clearly a pattern of fraud happening in Minnesota, majority of it involving a particular group of people. The fraud really took off in 2020 during the pandemic, which to me signals that it was simmering in 2019, but 2020 really gave it the push that it needed.
25, Minnesota paid $4.32 billion to these 14 high-risk programs. That is more than twice as much as it paid in 2021, when it was $2.06 billion.
Okay.
So is it realistic that more than twice as many legitimate services were rendered in 2025 than were in 2021? It's probably not realistic.
Correct.
And then once you start drilling down into the individual programs is where it's more dramatic.
Okay.
So for example, the autism program, which is probably the main one out of these Medicaid problems that I personally have been looking into, only 2 people have been charged so far, but there's expected to be a lot more charges down the road. It's a $1.29 billion program since 2018. In 2018, it only paid $6.1 million. Last year, $443 million.
Yeah, that's more than a red flag. That's like 46 burning dumpster fires.
Yeah.
And wouldn't you know it, Ilhan Omar was sworn in 2019 along with Tim Walz and Keith Ellison. The election of all 3 of them at the same time is arguably the worst thing to have happen to Minnesota. But let me tell you about the best thing that you'll hear about today. Chapter. If you are 65 and on Medicare, listen up. You are probably A, overpaying for your current Medicare plan, or B, you're probably on a plan that isn't the best fit for your needs. There's different plans, different coverage, different costs, and most people assume that once you pick a plan, that is the end of it. And therefore, they never go back to review their options. And that is why I partnered with Chapter. They connect you with licensed Medicare advisors who compare every plan available nationwide, not just one insurance company. Their job is to help you understand your options based on your doctor's prescriptions and budget. The call is free. There's no pressure to sign up, and it takes less than 20 minutes of your day. So again, if you are 65 and up and are on Medicare, or you're helping a parent navigate it, please dial 646-817-8160. That is 646-817-8160, or go to askchapter.org/Nellie. Now back to the story. Here's where Robbins became critical. She wasn't just pointing fingers, she was amplifying whistleblowers, the very people inside of Minnesota's system who tried to expose fraud, but had their promotions blocked. They faced retaliation, and in some cases even monitored. So just let that sink in a little bit. You have people trying to report fraud, trying to save taxpayer dollars from being given to thieves, and yet they were made to feel like they were the ones being investigated, like they were the pirates. It is quite shameful, and Kristin Robbins was one of the very few people in Minnesota's government actually saying that this is a problem.
Administration, the Legislative Office Auditor published 2 reports about the CASHAPP fraud. They outlined the fraudulent providers and the alleged movement of millions of dollars in cash out of our state to Somalia, with allegations that the money was going to fund terrorism. Unfortunately, according to multiple whistleblowers, soon after these reports were released, the Criminal Investigation Unit for Child Care Fraud, which had been leading the charge on these prosecutions, was shut down by the Department of Human Services. Rather than conducting criminal investigations of fraud, the Walz administration essentially renamed fraud as overpayment, and then referred any overpayment cases to a new internal overpayment committee, which would decide if they should pursue reimbursement. The money is walking out the door at the Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport. Back in 2017, the estimate was about $100 million in cash was going out annually from our airport. According to TSA, in 2024, there were $340 million in cash outbound, and in 2025, it was $350 million.
Governor Tim Walz dropped his re-election bid earlier this year, and fraud was a major reason why, but in his case, stepping away is not enough. I find it hard to believe that Tim Walz is not complicit in the fraud in Minnesota. It's also hard to believe that he didn't benefit from said fraud, because I am sure he did, allegedly. And now, as the FBI swoops in with more raids earlier this week, Walz wants to take some credit for it, like it was a joint partnership. He could have cleaned this up in 2021 when there were too many red flags to ignore.
Minnesota Governor Tim Walz addressing fraud during his State of the State address, but as DOJ raids hit the Twin Cities, he's calling out lawmakers for not stepping up to deal with it.
My ask for you tonight is simple. If you're taking fraud seriously, take your responsibility seriously and pass legislation to stop it. If you talk about oversight, vote for that oversight in the bills that are working their way through the chamber.
Walz also trying to take credit for the DOJ's federal raids targeting daycares and suspected fraud, writing, quote, "If you commit fraud in Minnesota, you're going to get caught." And that's exactly what we saw today. We catch criminals when state and federal agencies share information. Joint investigative work and securing justice depends on it.
It is just a little too late for that. He could have been asked for the support. So now we have to ask ourselves, what happens when someone like Robbins, who made fraud her central issue, who chaired oversight and pushed for hearings, what happens when she steps out of the race? Do you think that the issue will get louder or quietly fade away? And I know she already stated that the math didn't make any sense, that she had funding issues, that she didn't see a clear path to winning. And I get it, but that's the point. The point is she forced the conversation, and in many instances forced people to talk about fraud when others didn't want to. She brought whistleblowers' stories into the spotlight and made it hard to ignore what was really happening. But here's what you'll notice. The media coverage, it's fragmented. You'll hear about the raids, you'll hear about the investigations, but rarely do they connect all the dots into one big picture. That's where voices like Kristin Robbins mattered, because she was quite literally saying this is systemic. And the fact that people at DHS, largely overseeing the social service programs with massive fraud, skipped out on the hearing, including Tim Walz and Ilhan Omar, that is very telling.
So we invited the commissioner of DHS and others who had been involved in the program to attend today. They declined. And their reason for that is that now this program is under the jurisdiction of the Department of Children, Youth, and Families, who are here, and we're grateful that you are attending today. I would just like to note for the record that some of the people who used to work in this program did migrate over to DCYF, and we are grateful for them joining us. But there are people who are still at DHS who had direct responsibility for the child care program who are still at DHS. And they should have been here to answer questions, and they are not, and that is very disappointing to the committee. Secondly, I'd like to note for the record that we invited Governor Walz to attend. We first issued an invitation to him on March 9th, and he got his pick of dates. And we never had any response. And then late last night, he declined our invitation.
Now, Kristin Robbins says that she is going to keep fighting just from outside the governor's race, and she'll continue serving until her term ends in 2027. But elections matter because leadership determines what gets investigated, what gets ignored, and what gets buried. Fraud is not just a Minnesota issue. It is a national issue. Minnesota just happens to be one of the clearest examples right now. California too, of course. But when you start seeing whistleblowers silenced, billions of dollars unaccounted for, and investigations delayed, it's not just a policy problem, but a trust problem. And it is time for you to start figuring out how you're going to pay less tax dollars by any means necessary, because they are out here abusing our hard-earned money. I'm just kidding. We must work and be happy to give them all of our tax dollars. Anyways, so let me ask you something. If billions of taxpayer dollars were being misused, would you want someone aggressively investigating that, or would you rather have silence? Because that's really what this comes down to. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you got any value from today's video, please make sure you like, share, and subscribe to support the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss any future updates. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.